Welcome back to Business Strategy 450. This is week 7. Sorry about the slight delay in getting this posted. I had some technical problems, but hopefully the delay was not a problem for you. The agenda for this week, we're going to go over another corporate level strategy. We're going to focus on mergers and acquisitions, restructuring, and cooperative strategies, which are all somewhat interrelated in that they all deal with sort of the corporate finance aspects or growth opportunities involving third parties and companies. Again, I'm going to stay to the more streamlined approach. I'm going to try to highlight things that are important. First of all, I just want you to concentrate on a couple of the key definitions in mergers and acquisitions. First, there's a merger, which is when two firms agree to integrate their operations on a relatively co-equal basis. It doesn't mean that there's actually always a merger of equals. In 1996, I worked on the merger of MassMutual and Connecticut Mutual Life Insurance Company, and ostensibly they were deemed to be a merger of equals, but in reality, MassMutual ultimately retained the name and key management positions. So to some degree, there can be mergers where they're not fully equal, but these are transactions where you are combining the two operations together. An acquisition is where one firm buys a controlling 100% interest in another firm and essentially is going to make it a subsidiary within its operations. And then a takeover is a special type of acquisition strategy, and that's where the target firm did not solicit the acquiring firm's bid. Then there's a hostile takeover, and this is just an unfriendly takeover, and it's unexpected and typically undesired by the target firm. I'm not going to go into detail here in terms of the mechanics of a hostile takeover, but there is a process by which a takeover is possible on a hostile basis. One of the key themes that I want you to be thinking about as you evaluate mergers and acquisitions as a strategy or as a way for you to implement your strategy, and I guess maybe that's the first thing I would say. As I said in my blog, depending on the semantics you apply, you could consider mergers and acquisitions, restructuring, and collaborative arrangements as strategies. I tend to think of them as tactics that are used to implement strategies. In other words, your strategy may be growth into a particular market. It may be expansion of a certain set of capabilities, and you could do those in the form of what are called greenfields, which are startup operations. You could do them through organic growth, or you could do them through either joint or strategic alliances or mergers and acquisitions. So really, these are just different techniques to implement a core strategy. I think that's important for you to think about because it will help you as you think about the risks that you need to manage in an M&A scenario. Robert Holthausen at the University of Pennsylvania at Wharton said various studies have shown that mergers have failure rates of more than 50%, and one recent study found that 83% of all mergers fail to create value and half actually destroy value. And I won't go on to the rest of the quote. This is one example of a series of analyses that suggests that M&A transactions in large part are not necessarily beneficial to companies. So knowing that, and knowing that the transactions are fraught with risk, and understanding that they are really tactics that you should be considering to employ to meet your ultimate strategic objectives, you should understand how to manage the risk associated with M&A transactions. So in this lecture, I'm not going to focus quite so much on the transactions themselves as some of the issues you ought to consider in terms of managing the transactions and managing the risk associated with the transactions. So why do companies keep engaging in M&A? Well, there are some fairly good reasons to consider M&A as a tactic, as a means to enhance your strategic goals, your strategic objectives for your company. First of all, simply it can help you increase your market power. You can reshape your competitive advantage by increasing the size of your firm, adding to the resources and capabilities that your firm has to compete in the market, or increasing your total market share by gobbling up smaller companies. And this week we're going to be talking a little bit about Pfizer-Wyeth transaction. Pfizer has grown market share by gobbling up smaller companies, including Wyeth. And you'll see that they also took on Wyeth for the benefit of its resources and its capabilities, particularly as the Lipitor, the control over Lipitor phases away in November of 2011 because the drug can now be offered on a generic basis. They're looking at new ways to have additional resources and new ways to enhance their capabilities in the marketplace. Overcoming entry barriers. Often this is common in cross-border and international transactions. Next week we're going to talk about international as a strategy, but fundamentally sometimes it's easier to acquire an existing operation to establish a headquarters in a particular country than to try to establish a new business in that country. And again, for definitional purposes, remember the term greenfield. You may see it. A greenfield is a term that's used to describe a new operation, particularly in international operations, a new company that a new operation that a company sets up in a country. Cost of new product development and increased speed to market. Fundamentally, it may be easier, quicker to take someone else's products and bring them to market than to develop your own products. The time may be faster to do an M&A transaction. Typically, there may be somewhat less risk in using someone's existing proven products rather than developing entirely new products. Obviously, the more companies you acquire, the more diversified you are. Last week we talked a little bit about the challenges associated with diversification and the advantages associated with diversification, but certainly M&A may be a tactic you employ to become more diversified. And then you may learn new or develop new capabilities as a result of the new new operations that you acquire. But with all of that said, you need to understand the risks and challenges of M&A. According to the book, there's a handful of risks. There's the issues with integration, that is taking two businesses and pulling them together effectively. That's not an easy task. It requires a fair amount of skill, and if it's not done well, you can incur substantial additional expense and may not ultimately achieve the operational goals you set out to accomplish in the context of the M&A transaction. Inadequate evaluation of a target is another risk. You may have assumed that a target was going to be capable of providing you the level of additional capabilities and competencies that you thought were resident in that target company, but inadequate evaluation of the company may get you to a place that you didn't expect to be. You may find out that the company, after you've concluded the transaction, really didn't offer the range of capabilities that you were expecting, or in fact, it might offer you some negatives that you weren't expecting as well. Large or extraordinary debt in the target company can be a burden for the newly integrated companies. The inability to achieve synergy. A couple weeks ago I mentioned the term synergy. Synergy is where you yield benefits out of the combined company. This is the 1 + 1 = something more than 2. Typically, areas of synergy may be marketing enhancements, expense reduction, but there are ways that the two entities that are put together, whether they're in the form of a merger or in the form of an acquisition, that the combined entities create greater value together than they would as freestanding companies. And that's not always easy to achieve. In fact, my experience has been that that's one of the most difficult things to achieve in an M&A transaction. Too much diversification, using diversification as a substitute for innovation. I think we talked last week about some of the risks associated with diversification. Clearly, this is something that you should be concerned about. If taking on too many transactions puts you at risk to be over-diversified. And then the lack of manager focus on transactions. As I said, integration is challenging. Achieving synergy is challenging. If your business unit operating managers don't understand what they're getting into as they explore the possibility of entering into a transaction, you may end up with some significant problems at the end in terms of their capacity to manage the transaction effectively. And then sometimes deals are just way too big. If the size is substantially larger than you're capable of handling, that can render a deal not only problematic, but may ultimately be so big that you can't deal with issues like integration, synergy, or overall management of the transaction in a way that you had originally anticipated. And so sometimes size can add to some of the challenges I just identified. Those are some of the things the book talked about. I'm going to talk a little bit more about sort of 6 sort of fundamental areas that transactions sometimes become problems.